Hello YouTube. What you're about to watch is the recording of an interview that I recently did with Ryan Howard, one of the principal designers and writers of the all-new Elder Scrolls board game Betrayal of the Second Era. In the interview we'll talk about lore, we will talk about Bethesda's involvement in the lore for the game, we will be talking about the limitations that they had to work with, we have to talk about design choices and so much more. I think you'll really appreciate this interview, because in this interview you can really see the passion that Ryan and the rest of the team put into this project and, to try and get it right. And I've talked about this game on the channel a ton by this point, and fair to say that I'm a personal fan, which is why I asked whether we could do this interview. And I'm really happy that they agreed, because this way I can show you that they really were careful while designing the lore, and you can see some of the choices that they made behind the scenes. Now, I said we will be asking the questions because on this interview I asked Mr. Benefactor from the Imperial Library, one of the main Elder Scrolls Preservation fan sites, to also help with the interview. You will see him in the top left of your screen. Now, if you're interested in Betrayal of the Second Era, just know I put a link in the description of this video to the main page of the game to check it out. It's just a really good thing for any Elder Scrolls fan and a board game fan. There's a lot of Elder Scrolls and a lot of content there, and as you'll see in this interview, a lot of care has been put into designing the stories and lore of this game, so can't be any better, I would say. Anyway, that being said, I will throw you into the interview, and starting with Ryan's introduction of himself.
Yeah, my name is Ryan. I am the development director at Ship Theory Games. Me, along with our big development team, has worked on kind of the design and development of the Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era, and then we've also come up with like our own stories that we've been running, through Bethesda and stuff. But then most of the writing for that stuff has been with our department as well. Me and my co-writer Salem Scott have worked on that stuff.
All right, thank you very much. Now, if it's okay with all of you, I'll like to start with the first question, because I kind of want to go immediately into some of the details, because one of the things that I personally love most about the game is that you guys actually included some really obscure references to some really obscure Elder Scrolls material. I mean, I was kind of amazed to find like references to stuff like Elder Scrolls Stormhold with like the Stormhold crystals, and also some references to the Eye of Argonia, which is something which really hadn't been referenced in Elder Scrolls lore ever since Morrowind. And I was kind of wondering, like, how do you decide what references to put in the game?
That's a good question. So it's kind of interesting. So, like I said, my co-writer Salem Scott and we work on most of the stuff together, and so there's so much Elder Scrolls lore out there because the series has been going for such a long time. You're kind of free. You have some things where you're sort of like, okay, we have to have this, usually kind of tied into like whatever the vibe is of the region that we're in. But then we have a lot of freedom to kind of pick and choose things that are interesting to us. And so, I know a lot about Elder Scrolls now, and I have played a lot of Elder Scrolls since we started working on this. This project we've been working on for 4 or 5 years. But before we started working on this, I was not an Elder Scrolls player, really. Salem was, and so it was kind of a fun thing where we were able to. Salem is taking like a long time, love for the series and kind of taking the things that they really wanted to show off, and then I was learning about the series and playing it a lot at the time, and then trying to find the things that were most interesting to me. And so it was sort of like a desire to let's just pick out the things that we're most interested in and kind of do some spotlights on those things, and also trying to find things that were not terribly used a lot. So obviously, like Eye of Argonia, people like know what that is, but it's not something that comes up very often, and so we thought, oh, that'd be kind of a fun thing to mention. Or like some of the stuff with, the Stormhold crystals would kind of be a fun thing to mention. And then that kind of then has to be filtered through just making sure it gets approved by Bethesda, but also like tying it back into like the Second Era time period, because this game is definitely something that is happening at the same time, essentially, as Elder Scrolls Online, and so how do those things kind of work together, basically, was the other question we were asking.
Yeah, so this actually ties into my second question, because with those references, I've just been wondering, like, were there certain things, if you can say anything about that at all, were there certain things which you, like, initially really wanted to include, but then maybe decided against it, or maybe weren't allowed to based on feedback from either Bethesda or ZeniMax?
Well, there's always things that we're like, oh, that's cool, that's a fun thing, and sometimes those things just don't quite have room. For example, we're working on Elsewhere right now, and there are the I believe they're called the Dramathra. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but like kind of the Daedric Khajiit things, and we think those guys are pretty cool, but I'm not sure that we're going to necessarily have room for them in this set, just because we have a lot of other things that we're kind of trying to cover, basically. Sometimes there's those kinds of things, and then other times there's sort of things where it's like, okay, well, this maybe we might request this, and usually the directive would be like, if we're going to turn something down, like let's just make sure that it's tying in a little bit more directly with the events that are in Tamriel at this time period. So I know I've talked about before when people have asked about like we did have a couple other things from like some of the phone games that we were originally hoping to get in, and maybe we still will, some of these things eventually, but it was kind of they were kind of deemed a little bit too far afield from like kind of generally what's going on in those parts of Tamriel at this time, and so we ended up not being able to do those things. But we usually are able to working with Bethesda pivot pretty well so we can retain like the mechanics of what we want to do, because we do ultimately, we want the stories to be good, but the game has to play well, and so we're always kind of trying to make sure that we're crafting those stories to fit our game mechanics. And so usually we can get those things so that the stories are still fun and they still pair well with the mechanics without having to change the mechanics too much. So that's something we're always kind of thinking about too, is like, how does this thing that we want to come up with story-wise play into how the game works? And then if we have to change something, how do we change it in a way so that it still is playing the way we want it to?
Yeah, and you obviously, like, because it takes place at the same time as the Elder Scrolls Online, reference the Elder Scrolls Online a lot. But as you said, you ended up playing some of these games like yourself, but for example, the games from the really obscure references, like the phone games, did you give them a try, or did you use like, really?
I did not play the phone games, I will say. The unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, we used that a lot, used the Imperial library and stuff. So definitely for some of those things, we're like, oh, that's kind of a cool way to access like a program that would be a little bit honestly hard to find at this point. But definitely did play a lot of ESO for research, obviously, but also like the old single player games too and stuff. Like even went back into Arena and played that a fair amount, and couldn't get very far because the game is quite hard. But something that some observant people might pick up on is that a lot of, not everybody, but a lot of the characters in the game that we were making up that were not like previously extant in the Elder Scrolls universe, including Deslandra, we were kind of pulling those from the naming rubric that Arena applies to different, randomly generated NPCs, basically, where you can go and look and see that like basically all wood elves have like these are like the list of like name prefixes and name suffixes that they have available that will generate the stuff. And so we were kind of going through there and being like, oh, that'd be kind of a fun way to generate some of these names. And so like Deslandra, theoretically you could meet a Deslandra in Arena, but we just thought that was a cool looking name, and so we picked it. Same thing with like Arvin. If you run into Arvin in the Valenwood expansion, Arvin is a name that like a wood elf could have, for example. So those are, we tried to like kind of pull from all these different places and be like, oh, that's cool. Like we should pull that in a reference that this is a cool idea. Let's see if there's a way that we could tie this in, that kind of a thing. So
I have an actual question regarding the use of fan sites such as UESP or the Imperial Library. What have you found to be the most helpful, and is there any resources that you feel are missing that we could be able to provide?
Good question. I mean, definitely we use UESP a lot, and we also use I think it's ESO Fashion quite a bit, which is like the place where you can kind of check out all these different kind of like character looks, but also like usually that there's a big collection of the like what each individual like article of like clothing looks like, and what the different styles of like weapons look like and stuff. And we use those a lot for like art reference. Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to think about like what we would like a use for that we haven't seen. I mean, it is a very exhaustive resource. I'm very impressed at like what the fans of Elder Scrolls have like put together, and even seeing it's a very cool thing to like have lived on those sites for such a long time, and once our game came out, to see some pages being made for that kind of thing, or to see Imperial knowledge videos and stuff that we did is like a really neat feeling. I think we always love. I think like it's less if we can't find something, it's less of an issue of like there not being an entry for something, but like sometimes like would love something a little bit more like complete, like so sometimes there are still like weapons or items or things or like clothing or whatever that might not be like fully cataloged, that like it would be nice for us to be able to check out. But no, I mean, I think it's been pretty good. Like we certainly again do play the games a lot, because like one of the big things we do with like ESO when we're playing it is to like not only are we trying to find out like just the raw information to put into the region, but we want to kind of go and get like the vibe basically, and so like if you can read about like the Veiled Inheritance, for example, but then you want to go to Somerset and Valenwood, those regions, to play them, to kind of see how often this is coming up. Like, how do people feel about them in the region? What are some of like their big like, goals, and like where would you be thinking about them the most? And that kind of thing you really do glean from like playing. But yeah, I mean, I do think that those are pretty, exhaustive. If I think of something that comes to mind, I can circle back to that. But I do think that they are really, really cool resources, and I generally don't have like a lot of not negative, but I just don't really have a lot of like complaints about them. Like I think that they're very, very neat, and like the people who run them run them with a lot of care, and they're very helpful. And it's I think people recognize that like they're a really, really good resource.
Well, just as a follow-up question by me, like based on this, if you found something like to be incomplete on the fan sites, often that's because the lore itself is incomplete or like purposefully vague. But did you get any like support from Bethesda or ZeniMax themselves on issues like that? Like, were you able to ask everything, or were you like a little bit in the dark on some topics, just like the fans?
Sure. Well, I would say that I'm going to be careful how I say this, but like there are definitely some topics that I think that they hold pretty dear to them, in terms of, not that there's no answer or that kind of a thing, but like these are things that maybe either they want to retain a level of mystery about, or they want to answer them in the future in like one of their own products or whatever. And I'm not saying like that any specific thing that we were told one way or the other that like we want to answer it or we don't want to answer it or whatever, but just like there are things that they definitely want to, I think, retain control over, like how that information goes out and like the mystery level and stuff like that. And so those are things where we're like, for example, like the Eye of Argonia is a perfect example, where it's like the Eye of Argonia is like a fun, Easter egg type thing, where like it was mentioned obviously I think originally in the Redguard game, and then it's been kind of a little Easter egg that has been put out since then, and that's a thing where I think that we knew that like we're not going to be like breaking big lore information about the Eye of Argonia in our game, right? Like we can use it in kind of this sort of oblique way in which we use it, which is like as a MacGuffin that is ultimately kind of a wild goose chase to a degree, like where it's like we're using like the idea of it rather than us explaining, oh, this is exactly what it is, this is exactly where it is, like that kind of a thing. And so it wasn't necessarily, we weren't asking them a ton of questions in that regard, but it was more like we would see something that we would be interested in pursuing or portraying, we would pitch it to them. If they had information to give us, they would, or if they were like, we'd rather you kind of like take it in this direction a little bit, or maybe not quite touch this aspect of it. And so then we would kind of, rather than us directly asking them questions, we would kind of work with them, where we'd be like, what about this? Then they would kind of give us back some information, and back and forth, basically.
Following up on that, do you have your own personal theories on things like the Eye of Argonia or any of the mysteries that you've experienced that you would like to share?
That's a good question. Not really, honestly. So I think that when we are writing this stuff, and obviously, like there are things where like it's fun to make connections, right? So, like for example, in the Sijic Order quest for Valenwood, like there is there's that quest basically, like you're sent there by the Sijic Order because someone is trying to figure out like what happened to like the Falenesti, the traveling Falenesti city during this time period, and the Sijic Order is basically saying, well, why don't you go check this out because someone is trying to figure this out and we're afraid that it might have something to do with like the same kind of magic that can allow Artaeum to be put into a pocket dimension, right? And so they basically are like, we don't want anyone figuring that out just in case that these things are connected. So why don't you go put a stop to it so that no one is kind of figuring out our secrets, right? But it wasn't necessarily, I would say that like we don't really, and I think a lot of like writers who work on stuff like this might say the same thing. I don't think we really view it in that way of like, oh, our theory maybe would be that these two things are related. It's more like we're seeing that these two things are related. We're trying to more looking at it from like where do we have room to be creative, I guess. And so it was less of us like being like, oh, I wonder what it is, because I don't know if there is like a lore Bible in Bethesda's offices saying this is exactly what the Eye of Argonia is, or whether it's something that they purposely want to keep secret. And so it's more of a thing of like, we have this, we have this palette here and we have these colors that we can paint with. So like, what are the connections between the colors that we think could be fun? And then, in that way, you're kind of like creating that world rather than like theorizing about it. Like, and obviously, like a lot of creators and a lot of creative people like have mysteries that they kind of like purposefully choose to like keep in the text, and we certainly have things like that where we're like, well, let's not ever make this thing quite oblique, and we'll see if anyone comes up with like those connections on their own. But yeah, I would say that like we typically when we're talking about this stuff, we're not really necessarily theorizing about stuff like the Eye of Argonia, like what it actually is, or like like what the Jarl of the Wilds is, like what his relationship is with the other Jarls. It's more like, oh, we think this would be like an interesting concept, and so we'll kind of pursue it in that direction. And then like I think that it's cool to see people make those connections, out in the world. Like it shows like a level of like excitement and interest, and that's very like flattering to us, I guess I would say.
All right, thank you. Now I kind of wanted to move on to the setting itself, because you guys made the decision to make the game take place almost completely parallel to the Elder Scrolls Online. Was that setting, was that specifically your choice? Was it asked by Bethesda? Was there any flexibility on maybe exploring some of the past some more, or maybe even the future? Like, was there any room there during the initial development?
That was suggested to us by Bethesda, I think because they understood that we wanted to do our own stories, basically. And so they were like, this is a era where like the lore is a little bit more open, and you can work in this zone where like some of the stuff hasn't quite all been like elucidated and elaborated on, and you can also work directly with like the ESO like story team to help like craft some of that. So like originally we were like we like Elder Scrolls. We want to like the owner of the company and like some other people and like leadership really like Elder Scrolls, and so they were like, we want to do an Elder Scrolls game. And then we hadn't quite gotten, I don't think there was like really a really huge thought process in terms of like what that setting is, what that setting would be like within Elder Scrolls. Like we wanted it to be like a kind of a Tamriel encompassing thing, and so kind of that then being part of the remit of it being a Tamriel, all of Tamriel thing. ESO is the game in which it does take place over obviously there are still parts of the maps that are not quite fully open, but like generally speaking, it takes place over all of Tamriel, and so we had more information about like what was going on in like parts of the world at that time period, and so they thought it would be a good match, and so we sort of went in that direction based on that, and yeah, and it has been a good thing in terms of like, you know, if we were trying to set something in the Fourth Era, but we wanted to do something about like Somerset or what have you, I think there would be a level of vagueness that we would have to apply because like there isn't any like in-game information about like what's going on in Somerset. I mean, there's a little bit, but like it's not, no one's like been there, you know, in the Fourth Era. But also there is I think a bit of like protectiveness that like understandably Bethesda would have over like doing something there because they might want to set, you know, a future game in Somerset in the Fourth Era, and so having something where we're kind of working with people who like already have this stuff out there, I think was viewed as somewhere where we could kind of stretch our legs a little bit more creatively. So that was, I think, the process there was like, I think if we want to do it this way and not just straight up adapt a game, that this would be a good said environment to do it in.
All right, thank you very much. I think Mr. Benefactor actually had a question. Following up on
yes. So with the ESO's recent expansion, Solstice, ZeniMax has started to move the timeline forward. Does that change your philosophy of how you view the timeline of Betrayal of the Second Era? And will future expansions also move the timeline forward with your game?
That's a good question. So I think that I would say that we don't fully know the answer to that yet because right now we are focused on like completing the sort of like interweaving story arcs that we've set up. So if you've played, you know, for viewers who if you've played our game, so the base game has connections to the other regions that we want to be releasing as expansions, basically, and so. So like, because we wanted to try to build out those connections so that it didn't feel like weird if you're buying, for example, Elsewhere a few years later after the games come out, and like, how do I integrate Elsewhere? Well, in our game, like, it's already set up so that there are some quests that are sending you to Elsewhere. And so we view all that stuff as taking place at roughly the same time period. And so like, the thing we want to do first from a story perspective is to get all those games, all those expansions that have like interlocking stories out. And so for now, that's kind of like, we're setting all that still kind of in like that initial period of ESO. Now, I could see us in the future, once we've released all that stuff and if we want to still continue to make quest content, then pushing it forward a little bit kind of in line with as Solstice is doing. But for now, we're still kind of focused on like continuing to kind of close those loops that we set up when we originally started making the game.
To be fair, like, playing through the game, that was one of the, at least in my opinion, one of the cooler things where I'm like, I don't actually think this DLC is like, expansion as it's called in board games, is actually out yet. And it's very cool to see that you're already thinking ahead of including that. And also talking about the story, I think the next question, which is also by Mr. Benefactor, was specifically about the story of the board game. So for people who are watching this, I will, if you want to play this completely spoiler-free, which, if you want to, I'll leave a little bit of a timestamp in the comments so that you will be able to avoid spoilers and you can move on to the next spoiler-free question. But Ms. Benefactor, go ahead.
So this is going to get heavily into spoiler territory with this Landra and her goals. So in the base game of Betrayal of the Second Era, this Landra seems to want to create a world without magic, which she has attempted through many different paths. And with that, the many paths from Athelia, do you view the epilogue as part of those many paths?
That's a good question. So I would say that to us, it's sort of, it's not necessarily, well, I'll say that like, right now anyway, we'll see what ends up, how this ends up working. But we definitely are aware of the many paths and are thinking about it in actually the current wave of content, because we certainly have people ask us questions like what you're asking us right now. And so I can't say like for sure how this will shake out from a story perspective, but it's definitely something that we're kind of thinking about. Like, is there a way to kind of reference this or talk about this, you know, in a way that makes sense, but like isn't stepping on anybody else's toes in terms of stuff that, you know, the video games might want to cover or that kind of a thing. But it's more of a thing of that it's a many paths thing in the way that I would say that like any way that you could finish any of the video games is a many paths thing. So like for example, obviously I think that like a thing that a little lore bit that I think is so fun and just like kind of how crazy it is in Elder Scrolls is the Warp in the West kind of reference to how Daggerfall ends, where basically Daggerfall can end in all these insanely different ways, and then there is the reference to Warp in the West is sort of like later on it was like, and they kind of sort of all canonically happened, even though like they're all kind of like contradictory to each other, right? And we sort of view this not in like a Warp in the West way of like they all happen, but sort of like anytime you play an Elder Scrolls video game, you're going to play it differently. You're going to be doing different things. You might end up killing someone who you keep alive at another outcome. And so it's not like the idea would be that like all of the things that she's doing, she's working on all of those plans at the same time. Like it's not that she's literally like in one place here and then another place here, but like this is all taking place over the. She's a very busy woman, and so these are all taking place kind of over the same time period. And so like while you might be stopping her in Black Marsh, you know that like she had some plans going on in Morrowind at the same time, and so it's you could view it as like a many paths thing in the sense that like. Every time you play the game, like your hero is sort of resolving this conflict in like a different way, but it's more, we kind of view it as like she has a lot of irons and a lot of fires, and so when you play the game, you happen to be disrupting one of those irons, which does then kind of prevent her from doing the other ones because she is dead or she is otherwise indisposed and not able to do these other things. But it's kind of like each time you play, you're kind of like interacting with like a window into like one of her many plots, and so like in this version of the game, that's the window that ended up leading to her downfall, basically. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's sort of how we try to view it internally.
That actually kind of leads into one of the player choices. There is one choice that you can make during an ending to actually join with her in her goal. And one thing that I find interesting is that since her goal is a world without magic, if she was to succeed in her goal, Athelia actually moves to a world without magic at the end of her quest line, which makes me wonder, is there a connection there?
No, I would say there's not a connection to Athelia explicitly with that. I would say the other thing that's like worth thinking about is that like we never show Deslandra succeeding in, obviously she succeeds in a lot of like small ways sometimes, but like we never show her explicitly succeeding in removing Nirn from magic, basically of separating these two things. And so like it's certainly possible. That's a pretty high offer, but that's a pretty lofty goal. It would be a hard thing for any like mortal being to accomplish. And so I think it does remain to be seen, like, even if you join her, like, would she actually be able to do it? Now, I think that it's still, even if she can't, it's still worth trying to stop her because the things she's doing are very, very, like, serious, and they could really lead to a lot of damage. You know, for example, like, raising an army of the undead on the Glenumber Moors, regardless of whether she's able to separate Nirn from magic, would still be a pretty gnarly event to happen. And so I think that, like, you are saving Tamriel from like this fate of being without magic, but you're also saving Tamriel from like all of the knock-on effects of that, even if she wasn't able to succeed. So I think that like whether her ultimate end is doable, I would say remains in question. But what doesn't remain in question is that like what she's doing is going to hurt a lot of people, regardless of whether she's successful or not. And so like that's kind of how we view it. But it's not direct. I would not directly relate it to like Athelia, though. No.
So one of my other questions was when writing and the stories and like incorporating lore that that we've talked about. Did you face any like really significant challenges on your part? And if so, what kind of challenges did you face? And like, are there any specific ones that you're willing to share about like the challenges of building something within this really big universe?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the biggest challenges was just like the scope. So I mean, if people have seen the game, like it's really large. Like it is, you know, it. So like the base game has, I believe, 45 different quests in it, plus, 9 end games. And now that doesn't seem necessarily a lot if you're playing a video game, but that is a lot of content for a board game. And we are also like having to make sure that these are replayable and that they can play out differently, and that like the end games are fun and engaging and different every time that you're playing. And and every time we make a new region expansion, we're adding basically 10 more quests. We're basically adding 9 more quests and an end game. And so like the scale of writing all of that, and then like writing, like it's a lot of writing for like a team of 2 people basically to be covering all of that. And so wanting to make sure that we're not accidentally contradicting anything that we're writing about something in a different area, or that we're not accidentally contradicting anything that is in one of the Elder Scrolls video games. I think that was like a big thing that we were really like focused on, is like just making sure that internally it all makes sense, and that there's like fun, meaningful connections between all these different stories too, so that it feels you can feel like you can start anywhere, but you can also, you're like, oh, if I'm going to this one second instead of first, I can see kind of how it might relate into some other stuff. And there's even some parallels where I think you actually were one of the first people to figure this out, that there are quest lines where basically you are going to be doing one thing, and then you could play another campaign later where you would be like on the other side of that thing. So either maybe you are trying to prevent the thing that you were trying to do in a previous campaign, or you're kind of on the other side of it. So for example, like in Skyrim, there is a quest that you have to basically go and destroy some blood roots in Greymoor Keep, and in one of the quest lines you play as the Mages Guild, who is escorting, or who is doing the destruction, but you're being escorted by the Fighters Guild. And then in another quick campaign you actually play as the Fighters Guild, who's escorting the Mages Guild. And you can never play those 2 quests back to back, because that wouldn't make any sense. You can kind of see like, oh, here's another perspective about it. And so there was a lot of like trying to keep things consistent. As far as like challenging stuff, like in terms of like individual things you're trying to crack, I would say, not really. I would say honestly, it would be more of a thing of like, again, like sort of logistical things of like, how do we make this? We have a good idea for lore. How do we make this playable? Or vice versa, we have a really good idea for a gameplay mechanic. What is the lore that we are putting on top of it? And so, like we had some ideas about, we want Deslandra to be building like a giant, construct in Morrowind. So, the construct has to have like these different elements that she's bringing together. And so like, how do we kind of work that into all the different quests? And then like, once we've done that, like how do we then credibly create a creature that you're fighting in the end game for Morrowind that actually has all of these components that we've talked about in the game, right? Like that. So like you have things like the I believe it's the Fighters Guild quest in Morrowind, where you're trying to like knock out those canisters that are all like doing fire damage. And so like then we're like, okay, well then maybe we should have one of the robot pieces, so one of the construct pieces have like the quest unit skill burn, which does this. And so it's a lot of like, because all this stuff is interlocking, it's a lot of like just making sure that like this stuff feels consistent, so that you understand that like, oh, I did this, and that means then that this happened, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you very much. And during this answer, you also like name drop some of the guilds. Now, one of the most interesting things, at least in my opinion, while playing the game, other than like the intertwining quest lines, because that was one of the first things that I found out after like playing with one of my friends, and then later researching the game, I found out, hey, wait a second, this is the mirror side of that quest, which was really cool. But one of the other cool things is like you included almost every guild that's active during the time period. But you also like made your own guild. Like there's one faction that you can quest for, which hasn't appeared in any of the video games, the Outer Watch. And as you clarified to me, at least over email, like that's a faction that was like created by you guys. Like, how did you come to the concept of the Outer Watch, and how did you decide upon their design and like their philosophy and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so we're really happy with how that turned out. We wanted to come up with, we're obviously there are some guilds we have to include, right? And I would say that so we were kind of talking about like how many guilds made sense. We thought the 9 was a good number. It fit with, the number of regions in the game and stuff. And so we were like, 9 and 9, it could be cool, or the number of provinces in the game, I mean. And so we're like, well, obviously we have to do Fighters Guild, Mages Guild, Dark Brotherhood, Thieves Guild. Those ones are really big. And then I think like, Undaunted, a big group for ESO, and so it felt like a good one to put in there. And the things you could do quests for them, and Psijic Order. Like those, I think were like our big 6, right? And then after that, we were like, okay, well the other options are like a little bit less apparent. And so one of the things that I am like one of my favorite things that we've been able to do with Bethesda and ZeniMax that they've been really, really cool with us doing, and I think that they've enjoyed like kind of the additive nature of it, like from a lore perspective, is that one of the other, 2 of the other guilds, the ones that we didn't make up, were Eyes of the Queen and the Circle of Champions. Now, Eyes of the Queen, you can like do stuff with them, but like they don't have like a huge story presence in the way that those other guilds that I was saying do. And so we were able to, they were very cool with us. I think partially because like, Raz is such a popular character and things like that, and people really like seeing him when he pops up. Like they were really cool with us, like kind of coming up with like other ideas that like kind of spy things that they could be doing. The Circle of Champions obviously is a PvP guild, and you really don't do a lot for them other than PvP stuff in the game. And so I was really, our idea for like making them into, we're like, they still feel like a pretty iconic guild in terms of like this time period. So our idea that ZeniMax and Bethesda were really cool with us running with was like, what if we turn them into kind of like, they are a professional fighting organization, so what if we kind of actually examine the ramifications of that? Like, what does that mean for like a professional fighting group? Like, what does a sports league look like in Tamriel, basically? And so a lot of the quest lines you can go on are related to like tournaments you're in, or like people fixing fights, or like juicing, or like those kinds of things. Like how are we, or like benefit matches, things like that. A lot of stuff where it's like, what are the kind of downstream conflicts that you would have from like having a professional sports league in Tamriel. So then, as far as the last one goes, we kind of were bandying about a few other options of things that we could possibly do for the final guild, and a lot of them were either regional, or they were stuff like the Dragon Guard, which is like kind of regional, but also like is sort of a secretive organization at this time period. A lot of people don't really know that they exist, and so those didn't really seem like great fits. And we were kind of bandying back and forth, and it was actually Bethesda's suggestion of, why don't you make one and come back to us and sort of like come up with something that like you could do where it would make sense. A lot of people wouldn't necessarily know what it was, and it has a mission statement that kind of is a bit farther afield from the rest of the guilds, and then we'll see what we can do. And so we're like, okay, well this is a good way to maybe kind of like come up with something where it's sort of a general, community organization where we're kind of helping out the needy, but they have kind of a very wide remit in terms of what they're going to be working on. So you could have them do a lot of different things, and then we can tie them into the main story. So you can have it so that Cassandra used to be part of the group, and a way for them to kind of interact with, that gives them a reason to interact with all the other guilds and characters and stuff like that. So, and then the other kind of thing we think about when we're making this stuff is that we want people to kind of have a little bit of an idea in their heads of what they'll be doing in the game based on which guild they're joining. Now, some of those things, it's very, very easy to figure out. So, for example, you're doing Dark Brotherhood, you're probably going to be killing something. If you do Thieves Guild, you're probably going to be stealing something. But we wanted you to give, have mechanical ideas behind all the guilds too. So like, for example, the Undaunted, you're always going to be doing something with delving, the delving mechanic in that game, where you're going to be, which feels very thematic to them because they're always going into these crazy adventures where they're trying to like steal or take treasure from like very dangerous places. And so for the Outer Watch, we're like, well, they're all about like kind of planning and like viewing something from like a bird's eye view and figuring out like the best way to address it. And so all of the Outer Watch quests are like single step quests basically, where you kind of know exactly what you're going to be doing the entire time rather than switching between quest steps. So you can kind of take a very holistic thing where you're planning how that is going to go. Basically, you're going to be, you can plan from the beginning, how am I going to best address this problem? And so it was kind of, again, like a marriage of like, working with Bethesda and figuring out like where there was space to do these things, figuring out like a good hook that would help move the story forward, and also figuring out like where's the mechanical space that this stuff is going to live.
All right, thank you. Very good, very nice answer. The next few questions that we had were mostly on the future of the game. And Mr. Benefactor, both of us had very similar questions, but I'll leave those questions for now to Mr. Benefactor.
Great, and I will say I have some stuff here too. If I can hold it up if people want to, if we need it for various illustration basically.
All right.
I would love to see that map. That map has been on screen the whole time, and it's been my center of attention. Yes. Do you have any of the? This is the Somerset map.
Yep, Yep, and we have elsewhere here too. So these are our two new regions that we're going to be putting out in this round. So you can, as I said before, like these are already kind of like pre-built into the quests that are in the base game and in the Vanwood expansion, where you can kind of just send yourself right along to these zones, but you can also start in these zones and play, start playing in there and play either fully in those zones or even go between them or go back to the base game or what have you. So those are like, I would say, two of the biggest kind of content things that we're dropping is like the Elsewhere and the Somerset expansions. We're doing some other things too, which we can talk about.
You've also recently released several mini expansions such as the Cheese Pack and the Chef class as well. Are there any additional mini expansions in the works that you can talk about?
There are some in the works, but I can't talk about them yet. But I will say, what I can say about them is that, the cheese thing was an April Fool's product we did. We try to do an April Fool's product every year, not always for Elder Scrolls. This is the first one we've done for Elder Scrolls. It was certainly like well received, and so I certainly think we'll if not next year, then in future years, like have some more kind of funny products like that. And then the Chef Pack, which we released as like a con exclusive first, but will be kind of available in the campaign and also like on our website, soon. That was something where we're like, what's something we can release that we want people to still, it takes a long time to make this stuff, right? Like so like people started receiving this at the beginning of this year, basically, and now the campaign is coming out this fall, but like it's going to be a year or so after the campaign before people get any of the new stuff, and we want people to remain interested, remain excited, and feel like they're still getting some new stuff even in those in-between times. And so people really seem to enjoy the Chef Pack, and so we want to keep on doing stuff like that. So I will say I can't spoil what any of that might be, but certainly we felt like the releases of those two products was really successful, and we'd like to keep on doing them. And in fact, we actually are always trying to be efficient, and so as we've been testing the stuff that we're going to be releasing in this current campaign, we also have been at the same time testing some other smaller products that we'll be releasing, at other times for these smaller things. But I can't say what they are yet, though.
Okay. Now, I have to say, during the interview, I've seen the Somerset map lying on the table, but it's like, I know Mr. Benefactor wants to ask about the future of the game, so maybe leave it.
Yeah, we can talk about it.
Now I've seen elsewhere, and there's something that I do want to ask here. Because this is just a follow-up to me seeing the map. In Elder Scrolls Online, there's this zone in Elsewhere. Well, not really a zone. It's more like a space in Elsewhere, which is between Northern Elsewhere and Southern Elsewhere. Are you exploring that part in Betrayal of the Second Era too? Because I don't really see this slot there.
No, not really. So yeah, that's a really interesting logistical thing that we're thinking about. So generally speaking, ZeniMax is developing, Bethesda ZeniMax is developing this world, and they're still releasing, as we've seen with this year's Solstice stuff, they're still releasing new parts of the space. And so they have asked us to kind of not to be making new locations, basically. And so how we kind of deal with that is different depending on every region that we're in. So, in Morrowind, for example, and in Black Marsh, those two zones have areas that you cannot get to in ESO, and so generally speaking, we avoided going to those spots basically. So if you've played some of the later games. Really, not even not even later games. But if you played Arena, for example, that there is a town in northwestern Morrowind called Blacklight, but I don't think anyone's ever been to Blacklight since Arena, because Morrowind basically takes place mostly on Vardenfell, and there's not been other opportunities to get over there. And so we have, for those places that are not available in ESO, we've kind of not gone to those spots. As we've kind of talked with them about how that would work. Obviously there's some places where we've gone to that are probably a little bit outside of the bounds of the actual map for those regions in ESO, but we haven't it's not like you can go to Hellstrom or something like that. We aren't making actual locations you can go to within that. Now they've been really good about working with us to make sure that if there is something coming out that we could map, that we will. So for example, while we were working on the base game was when they were working on the Necrom chapter, and so we were able to get a sneak preview of that, so we could put the Necrom stuff from Necrom into Morrowind, which is great. It was really difficult in Skyrim because Skyrim is split in half by a pretty significantly sized kind of map chasm, basically. And so we decided the best way to handle that was to make it two different maps. For Elsewhere, as you said, that's a pretty small section. It's basically a section that is within this area. And we talked with them, and we kind of just figured out that I think the best way for us to, actually maybe it's this area, but the best way for us to handle that would be we can still have that be walkable, but we're not going to be outlining any of the actual locations in that area. And so at the scale that we're making the map, it really doesn't look, it looks pretty seamless. But there's a couple of unstable encounters that you can get in that area in between, but you have stuff like the Maryville Farms, kind of being on the southern end of Northern Elsewhere, whereas Black Heights is on the northern end of Southern Elsewhere. But those places are about 2 hexes away from each other on the map itself. So you are able to traverse in this area that is not traversable in ESO, but you can't actually. We're not making up new towns to go there or anything like that. So.
I do have one other question, though, relating to your own personal preferences. If you've played Elder Scrolls Online, what is your favorite faction?
You mean of the banners or what? What?
Faction war. The Aldmeri Dominion, Daggerfall Covenant, or Ebonheart Pact.
That's interesting. So I think we've. Salem and I would agree that the Aldmeri Dominion is kind of a little high and mighty for us. The High Elves are a little bit snobby, and they kind of sometimes impose their will on the other two groups in that one a bit more than we would prefer, and so it wouldn't be that one. I think that the Ebonheart Pact would probably be what I would say, just because I think that like the Argonians and sort of their story is very interesting, like how they kind of were able to throw off like enslavement to become like, as much as they, they're to attempt to become like an equal partner in this thing, I think is really cool. So I like the kind of like political struggles there where you still have like, I think it's really interesting how you still have like these dark elves who are not trying to like not be involved with this, or trying to still like enforce their own superiority. That is narratively interesting, but I don't love like that aspect of it. Obviously, all three of the factions have like their own like heroes and villains that are kind of like involved with that. But I also like the kind of internal political struggles of the Daggerfall government too. So I would say probably the Ebonheart Pact, but I like the Daggerfall government quite a bit as well. And I don't like dislike the Almeri Dominion, but I would say that's probably the faction that I would least want to join up if I lived in Tamriel. So yeah. I know if you guys are feeling like we're getting to the end of your questions, like that's fine, but I can talk a little bit about like what's coming up in the game too, if you guys want to know about it. So.
That's actually like
I would love that.
Yeah, well, I think we both wanted to ask that, but I don't think we were both sure whether or not you could talk about that, considering that it's...
Yeah, so I'll keep it kind of like high level, because I know we're going to be talking about a lot of this on the campaign itself. But like I said, we're going to be doing Somerset and Elsewhere. Generally speaking, the Elsewhere story is, without like spoiling like what's actually going on, like the Elsewhere story is going, and the overlay mechanic is going to focus around like Dysandra is like very interested in like the dragon incursion that is going on in Elsewhere at this time period, and so she's trying to figure out like, is there anything about this that I can kind of manipulate to my advantage, and like, is there anything I can learn about it? Can I understand the dragon's power at all? And that will include her kind of like seeing if she can potentially ally with a new dragon that we've made for this game. Somerset, meanwhile, is going to kind of be like, you get to Somerset and you're going to find out that there are these series of kind of like magical anomalies that are happening all around Somerset that Dysandra appears to be like involved with. You're not quite sure why or what she's doing yet, and what she's trying to accomplish with those things, but it seems like almost like she's creating these magical anomalies maybe to test kind of the bounds of reality, as she's sort of seeing if she can separate Nirn from the rest of the other realms. And so that will kind of manifest itself by like when you go to a new location, you're going to be triggering the overland effects that are going to be causing all of these sort of anomalous events to occur to you, basically. So those are the two kind of like new regions in terms of story, in terms of, classes and skill lines and stuff. Like, expect a lot of skill lines that are going to be kind of familiar to people who have played ESO, but some big ones that people have been asking for. I know people have seen, like, we're doing like Vampire and Werewolf for a couple that we're doing. We're also doing like Dual Wield is another one I know we've announced. We have some new racial abilities, like the stats are going to be the same, but like we have new race cards with new art from our artists, and they have like new once per battle abilities, so there's some more kind of customization you could do there when you're making your character. And then for classes, we have a bunch more classes that we're going to be making. There's a lot of them are kind of based on, if eagle-eyed people who played the previous game will know that not only did we do all the classes from ESO, but we also did a bunch of classes that you could find in the older games. Stuff like, Pilgrim and Templars from ESO, but like Pilgrim, or like, trying to think of some other ones that are, Spell Sword, things like that. And so we wanted to continue to pull from that resource, so we're going to be definitely doing some more classes from previous games, but then we're also coming up with classes that are not playable from previous games, that we worked with Bethesda and Dynamax to come up with like what would be good names for those, what would be good names for their skills, what kind of feels like they fit in with like this world, and so even stuff where like not necessarily that you're playing for like unique factions, but you might be seeing some of the classes where you're like, oh, this is interesting, this is kind of like this kind of puts me in like a different perspective or a different place in my head in terms of like where we are in Tamriel. The last thing we're doing that is like a big kind of gameplay element is it's a thing called Shadows of Oblivion, which is basically a series of Faustian-like bargains you can make with Daedric princes, where basically a Daedric prince is saying to you, hey, I'll give you some sort of great power, but in return, you're going to have to pay some sort of like cosmic price. And so even though those are going to be, I would say, a little bit lore light, it's not like you're going to be like explaining all sorts of new information about, for example, Shegaroth or Hermaeus Mora or something like that. You are going to get like a little bit of an insight into their characters, where they're going, kind of how they're going to each one of them has like their own unique mechanic that is like hopefully feels tied into some aspect of that prince's personality, and so you can kind of like feel like you're sort of being imposed upon by that Daedric prince as you're playing, because they're watching you do what you're doing, and they're kind of like giving you those blessings and those curses. As often happens when you're dealing with Daedra in Elder Scrolls, like you might think you're getting the good end of the bargain, but it may end up turning out that like you've kind of bitten off more than you can chew, basically.
All right. That actually sounds like very on brand with most of the Daedric princes, if you'll do it like that in the game. Also, for the people that are watching, and if you're interested, I'll also link to their main campaign website, so you can keep an eye on there for more updates on that kind of stuff. I do wonder though, after Elsewhere and Somerset, do you have any idea where you want to go next? If you can talk about that at all.
I would say that we certainly, if you look in the rules, like you can see we have plans for that, but I don't really want to talk about it too much right now, just because I think we're still, right now we're focused on like this round, and we certainly are trying to plan ahead on stuff, but like, how we kind of usually do these cycles of things is like we do the campaign, we put the stuff out, and then at the next kind of like opportune moment. So like in this case, it was about 9 months after the stuff dropped, we were doing the next one, and so like it's a thing of like right now we really want to focus on this stuff, and we definitely have thoughts about what to do for the final region we want to do. Obviously, there is one more province that's left in Tamriel after we do these 8. And so, we're thinking a lot about that, but ultimately we want to wait and see kind of how this is received and like what people are asking for, and making sure this stuff is really as good as it can be. But yeah, we certainly have thought about. That's certainly the things we've thought about, and we've also thought about like once we've finished up like all of the interlocking narratives, like is there more narrative to do? Like what will we do? Like would we kind of like change the format a little bit, or would we make more quests in the same regions? Like there's lots of thoughts there, but that's probably a little bit premature, I would say.
Then I had one final question, which is mostly for the people watching. Now, during some of my videos on the game, I've been like pretty outspoken on what like quests and sections of the game people must play, but like as one of the writers on the game, is there any like specific quest or quest line or specific faction quests that you think people should really want to play, like that they should definitely start with if they're a big Elder Scrolls fan?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, I know that one of the early ones that you highlighted is one that I like a lot, which is the what is it called? X-Larks the Spot, which is the Undaunted Morrowind quest, which is about looking for the Eye of Argonia. I think that one is quite fun. I obviously it's a very simple quest, but like I do recommend that people check out the Undaunted Blackmarsh quest as well, just because A, it is a really good way to introduce yourself to the game, and B, it does have, as you were saying, kind of some of the fun phone game reference stuff. My personal favorite quest in the game is probably, I mentioned it earlier today, but the Sijic Order Valenwood quest, which is you can get in the Valenwood expansion. That one is fun because it is looking at kind of like an interesting part of Valenwood's lore space, which is like the Felnesti disappearance, but also like it's a really fun quest in that like it allows you to complete the steps of it in any order, and then depending on the order and the way in which you complete the steps, that will change your final outcome. So that's like I think a really fun one, both from a story perspective and from like a gameplay perspective. let's see if there's anything else that is like immediately coming to mind. I mean, there's lots of fun stuff in there. I think that like there's a couple of quests that I know that you have highlighted also in some of your videos about the Jarl of the Wilds in Skyrim. I believe there's like the Dark Brotherhood quest and the Eyes of the Queen quest, I think both related to him. I think those ones are both like pretty fun and like interesting little things. I would encourage people to like, when this is not a quest thing, but I would encourage people like to, when they're going to towns, like to kind of read the little town description, which is not very long, but like you can see then like that we're trying to use that description to kind of inform like the mechanics of like what's available in every town. So for example, like my favorite town effect in the entire game is if you go to Solitude, which has the Bard's College in it. We kind of talk a little bit in the description about the Bard's College, but then the town square effect is that you can basically go to the Bard's College and become a bard. So if you're not already a bard class, you can go and take this town effect, and then you can be a bard in addition to being whatever class that you are. And so there's this kind of fun thing where you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go educate myself a little bit, and now I have some bard training as well as this stuff. So we really do try to make that stuff feel really like fun and funny and like integrated. I would say like don't sleep on the side quests too. Like the side quests have like a very small amount of flavor in them, but like we try to make them really fun. Like there's like I think a lot of people have like seen like the meatloaf quests that you can do in the side quests and things like that. So we definitely are trying to make all of this stuff like feel kind of interlocking, but also feel like funny and fun. Like our games, like we like to have like our own kind of interesting kind of sense of humor and things like that go into them. And so we hope people like that and that they appreciate like some of the silly jokes we make, but like still that it feels very like keyed into the Elder Scrolls. But I think those are some big ones that would be what I would say is I think check out the Skyrim quests I mentioned and like the Valenwood one. And the Eyes of the Queen one as well. So, the Eye of Argonia one as well. I mean, so those ones are some of our favorites, I think.
All right. Thank you very much for your answers. Thank you very much for your answers during the entire interview. Again, so thank you so much for being willing to do this, and also just like from a personal note, because like I've seen how some developers treat their franchise, like not talking about Bethesda, but like in general, like the fact that you are handling the Elder Scrolls IP with so much care, like I just really appreciate it. And like I just really appreciate like all the amounts of like flavor and world building that you've put into the game, and honestly it's been amazing delving into it. So thank you so much for like working on the game and making it, and handling the Elder Scrolls IP with so much care, and like for your own enthusiasm and like amazing work. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that. It's very gratifying. It's nice. It's nice to know that people really like it, and that makes us want to make more of it and make sure that people are really enjoying themselves and having a good time. So.
And you've given us references to things that we've wanted to hear more about for a long time, like the Stormhold crystals, Eye of Argonia. I'm really appreciative from a lore perspective of how deep you dive into those obscure references.
Yeah, I think we really have a good time trying to find stuff like that, and not all of that stuff necessarily sticks, but like it's all stuff where we're trying to, oh, that's a cool thing, or like for example, like we have Zivlai Moeth in the game, and obviously he does appear very briefly in ESO, but like that character is mostly a villain from the Battlespire game, and that was one of the things we thought was like, oh, this guy, he kind of has this whole other life that is separate from like his appearance in ESO. Like, are there any ways, even if we're not necessarily referencing specifically stuff in Battlespire, like, are there any other ways that we can kind of like indicate like his overall, like what his vibes are, like what he wants to be accomplishing, that kind of a thing? And so we like to try to find those kinds of things, and I'm glad people enjoy them, because we are always trying to come up with these like cool, like something that someone would be like, oh, that's cool, like, and once they realize it, so that's nice to see people are enjoying it.
Like those things really, like, it makes, at least for me, the game like really, really, really good. Like the little things, even though like you said, maybe you're not going super deep into it, but like the fact that it's there, and like the fact that it's bringing parts of this like big universe together with like some of the newer stuff, and then through this new board game, like it just it's, in my opinion, just a really cool thing that you've made. So like, yeah, thank you, and like, amazing job. And also like, just as a quick highlight, because I never mentioned it in the video, but like also your artists have done like an amazing job. Like the art, like I got the art book. I think I put it somewhere over here, but now I lost. Oh, there we go. Like I put it over here. Like the art book is so very much worth getting. Like your artists have been doing such a really good job, and like your entire writing team, everyone, like nothing but compliments from me, to be honest.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. Our artists really knock it out of the park. Like, so it's like Chris Beck did all the maps for the first game, and we had Federico Pompili did most of the enemy art, and Johan Boissonnet did the tiles art and like most of the items, and then Anthony Letourneau did the character, like the hero characters, and a lot of some of the other items and stuff. And they all think I did a really, really good job. It's cool to see this stuff being brought to life in a different way, you know, like without like, you know, it's a more of a much more illustrated way than you would get in like most of like the video games and stuff. So it was really cool to see like their interpretations and all that stuff. And I agree, they really knock it out of the park. And like that, I really appreciate that. Really like contributes to the immersion, and like that's a fun thing for me. Like as one of the writers on the thing, I am not like directing the art. Like that's that's Melanie Lavely, who is in charge of like our visual department. But because we're doing all the research, it's like I get to see this stuff. I pass back and like, okay, like here's like a drawing of like a scrib or whatever, and I'm like, okay, that looks good. Or maybe like, oh, actually, I think we need to adjust like his antenna a little bit, or what have you. And obviously, Bethesda is like putting a lot of input on that as well. But it's very gratifying to. It's nice when I'm like, oh, that'd be cool if we could see this. I would love to see like, you know, this character doing this thing, or this kind of creature doing this thing. And then whenever they bring that stuff back, it always looks like better even than I had thought it was going to look, you know, or like seeing like Johan come up with like a lot of these, the pieces for like the items. It's like a lot of these items, like these are all from ESO, but a lot of them either have like identical icons to other things, or like they, you know, or it's like very small or whatever. And so like it's very cool to see like him take this thing and make it like a little bit more like life-sized and like detailed and things like that. So it's a very cool thing for us too to see that stuff. But I'm glad that people seem to be liking it.
Yeah, like really an amazing job. I think with that, I'm going to end the interview unless Mr. Benefactor has like final remarks or anything like that. Okay, well then again, thank you so much for answering the questions. For people who are watching this, there will be links to both the store page of the game and to the campaign of the game in the description, so check it out if you want to know more about the game. I'll also leave some like gameplay overview stuff in the description, because I am not like the biggest board game guy. I am a lore guy, but like I've really enjoyed this game, but I am far from the best person to like explain you how to play it. Like that's best left to the professionals. So I'll leave some resources to that as well, if in case it helps you like choose whether or not you want to go get this game. But honestly, there's so much Elder Scrolls in this. Like I said at the end of most of my videos, you guys like offered to send me like a preview thing, and like you've never asked me to like directly or like force me to make content on it. But there's just so much on this, and most of it's like really good. So like I've just had a blast with it. So I can really recommend you guys checking it out. Thank you, Mr. Benefactor, from the Imperial Library for tagging along. And yeah, one final, like I think it's the third or fourth time that I thank you, but thank you to like Mr. Ryan for answering all of our questions.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah. It's campaign's October 15th is when it starts. So, but yeah, thank you very much.